Welcome to Authors Revealed. I'm Becky Anderson. I'm so excited. One of my favorite children's authors is here with his new book. It's Kenneth Oppel, and the book is called The Boundless. Take a train ride you'll never forget. Ken, welcome back to Anderson's in Naperville.
Thank you very much.
It is so exciting to have you back. This book, it literally is a thrill ride. It is a thrill ride on this train, the Boundless.
I thought it was a literary theme park ride.
Yeah, but it's just on rails.
Yeah.
Yeah, it truly is. It's the most phenomenal, brilliant, magnificent train that's ever been created, I think, by any author.
Well, I'm glad you liked it. I'm fond of it myself.
But it really was a thrill ride, and it had so many elements, and it's just all tied together. But what's blowing me away is that you've gotten starred reviews from every place you can get a starred review from. And to get a Kirkus starred review is quite something.
Oh, is that the crown? I didn't know how to rate them in terms of
booksellers.
Really?
I think when you get a Kirkus starred review, because they're the toughest.
Okay.
But you've gotten School Library Journal and PW and everybody, so
one feels incredibly lucky.
No, no, but so we're thrilled.
No,
because I think
if you're happy, I'm happy.
I'm so happy for this.
Good.
So it's been on shelves. I think it came out the 22nd.
Yes.
So we're talking about a week and a half now.
Yeah.
And of course we've heard from the pros reviewing it. But what are you hearing from all the kids who love your books and follow you?
Not a lot yet, because they hardly have it in their hands.
Yeah.
I mean, my early readers are who are they? Mostly my kids.
Kids. Okay,
yeah.
Well, what did your kids say?
Well, they're getting so old now. They're not as good a test audience for me, because now they're 18 and 15.
Yeah.
And so when I read to them now, they're just they want to show me. They want to show me what awesome critics they are. So they're not quite as open.
Sure.
But they like it anyway.
Well, how about this? I know you did a couple schools today, but how about the school events? What did you hear from those kids?
Nothing, which is good, because when I read, that's what I wanted to hear. Nothing, because
you could hear a pin drop, right?
Yeah. I mean, when a new book comes out, it takes you a while to find that right passage.
Sure.
Which just always works, and you can set it up quickly, and it's good. And I know these ones work now, because I've done them with grades 5, 6, 7, and 8s, and they were all unruly to begin with. It's Friday afternoon, they're going crazy, but they all got very quiet. So I think it works. That's my gauge.
So I know for every story, and you have done magical realism, all these different subgenres of so many different things throughout all the writing you've done. But where would you say the little germ started to grow, or the little seed started to grow for Boundless?
Boundless.
Yeah.
2 places. One, my love of trains. I do like taking the train. I just think it's there's still romance in it for me, traveling in the train. I like sleeping on the train. I took the train across Canada as part of the research. So Toronto, Vancouver, 4 days, 4 nights. It's great. You have to like trains, because you're on the train a long time. But I do, and I like the smallness. I don't mind that. I was seized with the idea of an incredibly long passenger train, and the idea of a character who gets bumped from the front to the back and has to work his way back up through the train, and all the different little worlds he'd go through, and the zones, and the people he'd meet, and the adventures he'd have, and the difficulties. It really was. I meant it like a theme park ride, because he's sort of he's negotiating his way through the train. So of course there's everything you can imagine on the train, and that was the joy of it for me, getting to to populate it and make it my sort of perfect fantasy train.
Was there anything you had to leave out, because it was? I mean, some of them are fantastical. As you're working from the caboose all the way to the boiler in the front of the train, were there any special worlds that you left out, or left on the?
There was a sultan's car that I left out. I really wanted it, and it was his own little country. It was like a diplomatic car, and so there were passports needed to get in, and I think there was a Will, the main character, gets sort of basically bogged down in the sultan car, but that had to go. Yeah. Sometimes you have to put some cards at the siding. So
I love the cover on the book. I think it's beautiful, just beautiful.
I think it's my most beautiful cover.
I think it is.
It's the colors, the blue and the gold. It really stands out.
Yeah. And see, Airborne is one of my favorite books ever.
Oh, thank you. That had a nice cover too.
That had a great cover too. But Will Everett, our hero of this story, and when you start off the book, it's taking place 3 years early before this incredible ride on the maiden voyage of the Boundless.
Yeah.
And his dad is he hasn't seen his dad in a long time. He's laying track, and he and his mom are living in a boarding house, that sort of thing. But then 3 years later, and Will. His dad, of course, probably wants him to follow him in his footsteps, but Will has different ideas.
Yes. Yeah.
So where did the idea for Will come from? Because I loved his character, but I love that that sort of battling between father and son about what he thinks he should be doing.
Will is largely inspired by my daughter, who is the artist in the family. She's a visual artist, and. I think sort of I learned a lot from her about how she sees the world and how she goes about, painting, and I went to her for advice when it came to, how do you sketch and where do you start with and what do you look at, where do your eyes go, and painting especially. There's a big scene at the end where Will has to do his first sort of portrait oil painting with very limited resources and a very tight timeline. Yeah. And so my daughter was very helpful for that. But, I have 3 kids, and you watch them get older and they, start to sort of show what they're interested in, their aspirations. And I just liked the potential conflict that would emerge between, the father and the son. Because the father got to have his own adventures, so you'd think he'd be quite receptive to the idea of his son going off and, blazing his own trail. But he's not. He's not at all. He wants him to be, safer and more conservative. And Will's quite, he's quite retiring initially, so he has to sort of, push back bit by bit.
Right. Well, the Boundless itself.
Yes.
Okay, 987 cars on this dream train. 11 kilometers, or about 7 miles long.
Yes.
Okay. It's got a cinema. It's got shooting ranges. It's got a circus.
Swimming pool.
It's got all of these things. Oh my gosh! You must have had a blast creating.
Oh, it was fun. You should see my PowerPoint. I've got the whole train visually. The first class, second class, and third class, and the colonist cars and the circus cars.
So you said you rode across Canada on the
it's called the Canadian.
Canadian.
Yeah.
What other research did you do for this? Because I know you had to go back and research sort of the late, Victorian era, late 1800s, and the railway and everything. But anything that you found out that was really surprising when you were doing your research about that, or something that made it into the book that was so much fun for you to discover?
Well, one thing on my train, there's a shooting gallery, and I just thought it was so outlandish that people would, want to shoot things off the train. Subsequently, in my research, I learned that, in the late 1800s, across, Canada, across on the Union Pacific in the U.S., passengers would shoot out the windows at pistols, mostly at Buffalo. It seems to be the most unsporting thing you could imagine, just to shoot it, just because you could, when we went by. That was pretty amazing. So, that had to go in the book, of course. Right. Mostly I just tried, the tracks are sort of like, to me, a big seam in the continent that sort of open up all these stories and folk tales. So the Sasquatch came out, and the muskeg hag, which I sort of invented.
I know, but that was so great.
That's one of my favorite parts.
That's so great, the book. Yeah.
So just a lot. I tried to put in as much. It's quite a Canadian book in some ways, because it's about the CPR, but a magic realist version. But it's so similar to every story of the Transcontinental Railway. You had down here the Union Pacific and the last spike in Promontory, Utah. Ours was in the Rockies at Craigellachie in 1885. So I wanted to put as much sort of real stuff in, but alter it.
Yeah, fantastical element to that. The railroad baron that's featured in this. It's Cornelius Van Horn.
Yes.
And I looked it up. He was born in Frankfort, Illinois, not far from here.
He did railways down here, and then he came up to do ours.
He came up to Canada. Yeah. And I just thought that was so cool because you have some real people in this book, and he was quite the guy.
He was. I read a lot about him. I read about the building of the CPR, and he was one of these tireless sort of visionaries. Never, he hardly slept. He was always doing something. A bit of a slave driver maybe, but
Well, this book to me, and I so agree with some of the reviews too, because the mix that you have in this book of the adventure and the thrill, right? There's a little bit of romance with the girl who's the tightrope rocker in the circus, but the characters too, but the gadgetry, everything is in this. And also too, there's that underlying part of some social history.
Yeah,
talking about
for
stuff.
sure.
But it's such a great blend. And I always wonder when an author can get it just right, that this you throw it all in and it comes out.
Yeah.
How do you get that blend and that you don't go over the top on any one element? I mean, is it hard to work that out?
It just takes time. One of the hardest things to learn as a writer. I mean, this is my 28th book.
Oh my gosh, I was wondering how many.
I lose track a little, but
wow.
you know, each time I think I'll be quicker at getting it right, or it'll come out faster. But each time you realize patience is such a big ingredient, because you asked how does it all come together? It comes together draft after draft, layer after layer. Right. And only subsequently did I realize, I didn't have enough of certain things I wanted. Like I wanted a Métis character. So I made Mr. Dorian, the ringmaster, Métis. And that sort of changed the way he saw people and dealt with people, his relationships with sort of the white Europeans and then the newly arrived immigrants. Right. I wanted to have a Chinese-Canadian character because they were a huge part of building the railway up in the Rockies and were, terribly treated. So, I tried to include as much as possible, and it doesn't bog the book down. I think it just enriches it, because it paints a much fuller palette of the world at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then of course the book starts out with you have the beginning story, but then you skip 3 years later. Will's he's taller, he's he's a little bit older, but then he's off the train, on this maiden voyage, and he witnesses a murder. And the person he murders, and we don't want to give too many spoilers, but he's one of the two people, and the other is his father that holds the key to a special funeral car. Right. And I'm not going to say whose funeral car it is.
Oh, go ahead, it's okay.
Okay, but anyway, but it has part of this treasure that's in this funeral car is that gold spike that you find out early, starts the book off.
Yeah, well, he gets to drive it.
Yeah, he gets to drive it into the rails.
Yes.
So the whole funeral car thing I thought that was so cool, that part of it.
I'm glad you like that. Yeah. That was one of my favorite little inventions. So,
this tell us what you thought. I mean, you talk about the railway and what it did for Canada, what it did for this whole continent. I mean, did it really surprise you in what you found out? What the railroads really did to make Canada and the United States
what they were,
what we would be
today. Yeah, I mean, my emphasis was on Canada, and literally the country wouldn't exist as we know it, because the West Coast, what's now British Columbia, had to be bribed to join Canada, or else that might have been part of the United States. Because we have more in common, we're closer, it's easier. So the railway not only sort of bound the country together, but it dictated in Canada anyway that really where all the settlements, all the major cities in Canada follow those train tracks for an obvious reason, just because that's where all the supplies were coming through, and it was easy to move people through them. So it's just, and also the other thing I liked about the railway, it's the first time people were moving at that speed. I mean, they'd never moved so quickly, and it necessitated the creation of time zones, which is something I play with a little bit in the book, because Sanford Fleming, who's a real engineer and surveyor, invented the concept of time zones. And he's one of the passengers on the maiden voyage too. And there's some fun I have with time zones in the book.
Steampunk. I think you were ahead of your time when you started writing, probably Airborne, I'm going to say, Skybreaker.
Yeah, 2004, yeah.
But I think, this now become this sort of subgenre of whether it's science fiction or fantasy or whatever, and it's all the gadgetry, and this book is full of that. The train itself, of course, is that. Have you always enjoyed gadgets and things like that?
I kind of do. Yeah? I do like interesting machines and sort of big things that move and fly and stuff. It's just fun. I like the look of it, and they were so good at that in the Victorian age and the Edwardian age, of making sort of not just machines, but so quite interesting and beautiful looking machines too, that I don't feel we have as much anymore. So there's a whole aesthetic appeal too.
Well, and also men carried pocket watches that were just absolutely
these
gorgeous.
Beautiful fobs and watches
exactly.
and
Now this book is different because you wrote it in the present tense.
Yes.
Which I love.
Oh, good.
I absolutely love, because you feel like you're so part of the story, and the immediacy of everything that is happening. That you are in it. You're in it with Will. You're right there.
Well, good. Well, that was the intent. I mean, one of the reasons I did that is that it's a historic. It takes place in a historical period. It's the 1880s, and I was very worried that people would say, "Oh, it's historical fiction," and that phrase horrifies me because it sounds like something that's supposed to be good for you. To me, it's like, this will be school, and so the writing in the present tense to me is a way of saying it's not taking place back then. It's right now. It's unrolling before your eyes. So I think it achieves that, that effect in the book.
Now, have you always been a fan of Sasquatches or Bigfoot or whatever you want to call them?
Yeah, I'm a big fan in sort of the discovery, you know, the things that are sort of, you know, unseen but suspected to be out there, you know, Sasquatch or the Yeti. I mean, in Airborne, I created a whole new sort of ecosystem for the sky of these creatures that we just don't see from Earth, but once you're up there, you know, it's a whole new world. So yeah, I love stuff like that. I just love the and I like the you know, the Canadianness for me of Sasquatch, even though I know he's Bigfoot and even Sasquatch down here.
Right.
That was just another sort of like element of folklore that got released into the world.
You know, there's the other theme, we mentioned just briefly before about the social issues, and I don't think you intended to put that theme in, but you do get such a sense of that because of the, you know, the class system, the, you know, the immigrants, all the different types of people, you know, and race and everything.
Right.
And it really does bring it up because I think that time period, it was that time when things were really starting to change, I think.
Definitely.
And the movement westward. And so was that something you intended to put in there, or was it just something you really wanted to make as part, as making this a really full-fledged kind of story?
Well, it happened increasingly. I mean, at first the impulse was the train, you know, and the quest to get from the back to the front of the train. And then as I realized this was such a story set in a, you know, a historical moment, I thought, hey, there's all sorts of stuff going on here. You know, there's horrible, you know, inequalities and exploitation of workers, and friction between, you know, the native inhabitants of Canada and the European settlers. And I thought, I've got to include that, you know, because or else it just seems like it's this little story happening in a vacuum, and it wouldn't seem as true or as rich. So yes, as increasingly draft by draft, I wanted to bring more of those little details into the book.
I love that aspect of it because I think when something it has the magical elements to it, but you put that in, it just makes it seems like this really is real in a way.
Yeah, well, even though, you know, I've written a lot of fantasy books, I think the key to a good fantasy is you've got to build it on a foundation of fact, because then the reader believes you and trusts you, and then will travel with you when you start inventing the real whoppers and pulling the rabbit out of the hat, you know, and inventing stuff. They'll still think it seems credible. Yeah.
Brogan, he was a bad guy. He is a good villain.
He's a good villain, but you know, even he has a little. He has. I think you can have some sympathy with him. He had a rotten job.
Yeah, he did a rotten job.
Yeah.
But we won't say anymore. We don't want to do any
spoilers. No.
Okay.
I don't like one-dimensional villains. I have to say that because I hate villains that are just like they're bad because why? Because they're just bad. Right. You know, I think that's sort of not very interesting. And kids appreciate a bit of ambiguity and, you know, gray.
So tell us about your earliest recollection of wanting to be a writer. Do you remember that first story that you hear, oh wow, look what I've written, you know?
The very first thing. Well, I mean, I was making stuff up from such an early age. You know, when I was in preschool, I made up a song that my teacher wrote on a cardboard and forced my class to sing it and stuff. And then I was always inventing things and putting on little shows for my parents in the basement. You know, I like telling stories. And so I don't know when the moment came where I thought, oh, this is good, but I think around 13, you know, was when I thought I want to be a writer. You know, this is what I want to do.
So tell us about your Roald Dahl experience and getting published at 17.
Yeah,
so tell us that story.
It's a good story.
Phenomenal.
It's a good story. Over 2 summer holidays, well, over one summer holiday, I wrote a book about a boy who discovers there's another world beyond his favorite video game. And I worked on it all summer. I typed it up with my parents' help. I sent it out to a whole bunch of publishers in Canada to see if they wanted to publish it, and they all rejected it. So I was disappointed. But the next summer when I was 15, I went back to work on it and tried to make it more interesting. And it grew. It was about 100 pages, certainly the longest thing, you know, I'd written.
Sure.
And this is when my lucky break happened. My father was working with another lawyer who knew a very famous writer in England who happened to be Roald Dahl. And you know, this colleague of my father's knew I was an aspiring author, and I'd written this book, and he was going to visit Roald Dahl in England, and he said, I'll bring the book and show it to Roald Dahl. And I had no idea if this was actually going to happen, because it seemed just too good to be true. But Roald Dahl must have at least, I don't know if he ever read the whole thing, he certainly must have cast an eye over it favorably. And he passed it on to his literary agent, and they took me on and sold it. That was how my first book got published. And that book was me trying to write like Roald Dahl, who was my hero at the time. So that's no wonder he liked the book. It's like, this kid writes exactly like me. I love this kid.
Yeah. But you're 17, so Colin's Fantastic Video Adventure. Yes.
Yeah.
Wow, that is so cool.
It's a great, it was a huge sort of head start.
Yeah. You know, you've won a lot of awards, and here in the U.S., you know, you won for Airborne. It was a Prince Honor Award.
Yep.
It was a Prince Honor Award, which is really phenomenal.
Yeah.
But in Canada, it won the Governor's Award, which is like winning. Is it like winning the Newbery or winning the? What would you say it is? Because to me, that's like top award for children's literature.
it's
Canada.
it's the top literary award in Canada. I mean, there's some other good ones. We're actually lucky in Canada for a country our size. We have quite a few awards, but the Governor General's one has the most prestige around it still. Yeah.
So are you published? Your publisher for Boundless is Simon Schuster here in the United States. Who is it in Canada that publishes it?
HarperCollins Canada.
It's HarperCollins Canada. Okay. So do you see any differences? And I know you're going to say about the same of readers. You know, readers are the same. But do you see any difference in the book market, say in Canada and the U.S., or your publishing experiences? You know, depending on who you publish with.
I don't know. That's kind of a deep question. Well, I don't know.
No, just because, you know, it's so interesting how the translation with books that are published in Canada, and some translate so well for the U.S. market, and some are published simultaneously, just like Boundless is. And then there's some that never make it to the U.S. market, and some that never cross the other way. So it's so interesting.
The border's more porous sort of coming into Canada, because like everything, like, I mean, sort of American culture is, you know, global. Less, I think, comes to you from us, just because we're a much smaller country, you know, and so we have a smaller market. So it's harder, you know, the market it's smaller and it's tougher because there's so much more competition. You know, there's only, you know, a bookstore only has so many shelves, and you know, mostly it's holding, you know, there's American books, of course, British books, Canadian books. So we're always, you know, like any underdog, you know, sort of scrabble a little bit harder, you work a bit harder.
So I was wondering on your books, especially a book like The Boundless, you know, do you sit down and do a fairly detailed outline, or is it you sit down and start to write, and as the action, everything that's taking place, it's surprising you as much as it does when we read it for the first time?
I wish it were. I mean, that's kind of the curse of being a writer, or my kind of writer, because I am a planner. I mean, where the wonderful surprises come to me at the very beginning when I'm just jotting ideas down in my ideas notebooks, and that's, to me, that's the daydreaming stage. That's my favorite part, because I'm not, you know, writing it chapter by chapter. But I do outlines, and so when I write the scenes, you know, the surprises are minimal to me, and often it's odd because I'll be writing a scene, I think, oh, tedious, but those will be, you know, for the reader, the most exciting parts of the story sometimes. But I don't get that pleasure because I know, you know, what's going to happen ahead of time. But having said that, I mean, there's always surprises along the way. Yeah. So it's a roadmap, but there's detours and breakdowns and bathroom breaks. Serendipity will
just
come in.
Maybe eat once in a while.
Yep.
You know, you've written middle grade and YA, and I know you've done some screenplay writing. Do you ever sit down and a different approach, or is it's just a point of sitting down and writing a story? I know screenplay obviously is the different one.
Yes.
But you never sit down. Okay, I'm going to sit down today. I'm going to write a middle grade novel. You know, you don't sit down and do it that way.
Not really. The story, I don't know. I don't think of the audience too much when I'm writing, and the story seems to find its own level. You know, it's like water. You know, and it's based on a whole bunch of factors. It's not just the age of the character, and it's not just the subject matter. It's just sort of the lens somehow you view it through. I mean, I think for the middle reader, it's the story is just so paramount, and it's the same with YA too. I think in YA, you know, you get into so many, you know, different demands. You know, there's, you know, paranormal and a lot more romance, and so it seems to be more contemporary, sort of the issues and the concerns. Middle grade, it seems, is still that wonderful sort of storybook area. You know, that 8 to 12. I think of it as the magic age of childhood. For my reading, that was my favorite, you know, span of my reading life, because you're still hungry and you're curious and you're so open to things. And then as you get into teenager, it's like, whatever.
But it's this age, though, and this is the age we always think that, and especially a book like this, is going to keep kids reading. And if you keep them reading at this age, you've got them for life.
I like to think so.
And that's the way we think about it too, because in a book like this is a book that's really going to keep kids reading. You know?
Well, thank you. I hope that's the case.
So what I want to know, and I know some of your books have been optioned.
Yes.
This book, and of course, Airborne to me was so visual, and this one it would make a phenomenal movie. You know.
It would be fun. Yeah.
So
What are you asking me?
I know if you ever had, is this an option?
It's not yet, no.
Well, somebody better. Somebody better.
How much money have you got in your pocket? What have you got?
Not enough.
Really?
I'm afraid. I'm sorry.
I know. Kids always ask me that, are you going to make it into a movie? And I say,
I know.
I would love to, but I
Yeah,
don't have $50
yeah.
million.
Yeah.
So.
So what are you working on now? Are you taking a break after all this?
My next book's already written.
Wow.
It's done.
Can you tell us a little bit? If you don't have to reveal too much.
It's called The Nest.
Okay.
And what can I say about it? It's a bit creepy.
Like creepy?
The way I describe it to people is it's a bit like Coraline meets Charlotte's Web meets Alien.
Oh, wow.
So that's all I'm going to say about it.
Well,
I think you know exactly what the story is about now.
Yeah,
So
that sounds great.
what more can I say? Yeah.
The Coraline and the Alien, I like that's the creepy part.
Yeah.
That sounds really good.
Yeah.
And whether there's pigs or spiders
There's
in there.
no
also.
pigs.
Oh,
No.
okay.
There's wasps.
Oh, wasps.
There's wasps. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Okay, I end these interviews with a little quiz. So
Okay.
no pressure.
All
So
right.
it's lightning round. So whatever comes to you right off the bat, that's your answer. Okay. What was your favorite book when you were very young, growing up on Vancouver Island, would you say?
Danny Champion of the World. Roald Dahl.
Okay.
Easy.
And do you remember a book maybe when in your teens, maybe when you were in high school, something that still stayed with you?
Yeah. I was going to say Chocolate War, Robert Cormier.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how about a book when you were at the University of Toronto? English and cinema.
English and cinema was my major.
Right.
I don't know. Moby Dick, maybe. Moby Dick.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's just really, just the voice, call me Ishmael, pulls you right in.
How about a favorite film that you had to study?
Oh, well, my favorite film at that time was Blade Runner, and still is. I still go back to Blade Runner.
Yeah.
I know I should pick an artier film or something,
No,
but
no,
Blade
no,
Runner,
no.
Blade Runner to me
has
is.
stood the test of time.
It does. I think it does. It's a very flawed film, but it's greater than this, some of its parts.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, how about a book you've been an evangelist for? Something you've read, anytime in your life that you could not tell enough people that they had to read it.
Well, that's easy too. It's M.T. Anderson's Feed. I tell that to kids every time. Every time they ask for a reading recommendation, I say, "This is the book. I wish I had written Feed." To me, it's the perfect YA book. I love that book. It's genius.
What would you call a guilty pleasure read? It can be anything, or maybe nothing's guilty.
I'm going back. It's probably Jurassic Park. Michael Crichton. That was the last time I remember. I actually didn't work at all that day. I just read it, and the story was just so great. Just the concept of re-engineered dinosaurs on this island. It was. I loved it. I loved it.
What writers or writer would you say has had the most influence for you as a writer?
Well, initially it was Roald Dahl. But then, as my reading expanded, all sorts of other people came in and started muddying up the waters. There was Hemingway for a long time. I thought Hemingway was, let's pare it down. And then John Updike came in and introduced all his classical references and adjectives and adverbs. And then it's a whole, Doonesbury, the comic strip.
Sure.
That really that taught me a lot about dialogue and just sort of the ping pong rhythm of repartee.
Sure,
I learned a lot from that. So it's funny how the sources come together.
Yeah. And how about something, I know you said your kids are now in their teens, they're getting older, but do you remember something maybe when they were younger that you loved just to curl up and read with them?
Oh yeah. Shirley Hughes, the British children's book writer, Alfie and Annie Rose stories. They're still great. She's a genius because she knows exactly how kids behave and how they feel, and her drawings were perfect, and the kids' expressions are perfect, and their little dramas. And as a parent, when you read to your kids, you want a story that you can read without wanting to shoot yourself, in the head.
Exactly.
So, and her stories were very well written. So it was always a pleasure, if they said, "Oh, I want Shirley Hughes," it's like yes, because I love to read those.
I remember reading my kids some of those.
Yeah,
too. They're really
great.
good. And what are you reading now? Something you're enjoying now or read just recently?
I'm reading these completely fascinating, unique, maddening. This is a little trilogy. The first one was called Annihilation. Jeff Vandermeer.
Okay.
I've got his name right, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
And I've got an advanced copy of the second one, which is called. It's terrible. Is it Authority? I think it's Authority. Yeah, it has a bunny on the cover.
Yeah. Okay.
It's great. It's just about this weird Area X. And people are exploring what happened in Area X. These scientists go in and just weird stuff happens, but I like it very much.
Okay. 100%. Alex Trebek would be so proud of you.
Yay.
So that's great. Okay.
Lightning round.
Well, Ken, thank you so much for sitting in.
No, thanks for the interview.
And
it was
thank
fun.
you for writing The Boundless. It is such a ride. Everyone has got to read it. So congrats
Thank you.
writing the Boundless.
It's my pleasure to write it. It's nice that you liked it too.
All right. What a great conversation with Canadian author Kenneth Oppel about his new children's book, The Boundless. You got to read this one. It's a train you'll never forget. Thanks for joining me on Authors Revealed.